Any thoughts, questions, comments about last week before we get moving? We're finishing the packet that I had for you last week. We're on page 6. Online, folks, I just put it in the chat again. But before we do that, are there any thoughts, questions, comments? Dean?
So I don't want to get too far in the weeds in this, but so our epistle today is 1 Corinthians 13.
Yes.
13.
The love chapter.
Explain to me verse 13
That says,
that says,
I don't have it before me.
so now faith, hope, and love,
Yes.
by these three, but the greatest of these is love.
Yes. So explain that. So faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these is love. Explain that. So one of the reasons that's hard to understand most of the time is because this chapter is completely taken out of context. When do we typically hear this chapter?
Weddings.
At a wedding. And we were guilty of it too. We've got plaques of it in our house but Paul here is not addressing love first and foremost between individuals. We have to remember that this is in the middle of his admonition of a church body and talking about the love. So all of the descripting parts leading up to verse 13 is describing to you the work of the Holy Spirit and the embodiment of that work in Jesus. Okay, so when it says in verse 13, the greatest of these is love, that is pointing us to the cross. The love of Jesus is seen ultimately through his. So when we say love God, love others, how does a Christian first and foremost love another? They set themselves aside for the sake of serving someone. Greater man has no greater love than a man that lays down his life for another, right? So that's what you're looking at there, is the greatest of these is love, because we have to take it in context first and foremost of love, and then we can have the conversation about, okay, now what do we have faith in? What do we have hope in? Jesus. So that's why love is the greatest, because ultimately that's also the overall existence of us and our relationship with God. God created out of love. God provided his son out of love. God put his son to death out of love. So that's what you have. And the love we're talking about, right? The love is not the love of man, because our love is imperfect. So when we say the greatest of these is love and then think in our own minds, you're going to come up with an imperfect image, because no matter how good of a relationship my bride and I have, that love that I have for her and she for me is still flawed when it comes to who we are as sinners. But so long as it's grounded in the true love of God through Jesus, then the love that we have can be perfected in him. And then the greatest, yes, that we do have is love. So our relationship as a married couple isn't as much about how much we love each other as it is that the love of Christ is what brought us and keeps us as one body. That's why whenever you have a broken relationship, it hurts so much, right? Because that one flesh is ripped apart, and you're dealing with the fact that just think of it physiologically and also emotionally. You've given yourself a part of yourself to that person. And then we have that biblically too. Woman is created out of man, literally a rib, right? And so when those two come back together, they are made whole again, one flesh. Each of them are incomplete without the other. And that's also why Luther then would call Katie my rib, because of that one flesh mentality. Good question.
Not even maritally, but like the 2 paragraphs before that in 1 Corinthians 12 is the whole one body with many members, and
Right.
the body of Christ. Like, you can't
Yeah, so, yeah.
You can't look at the hand and say, I don't need you. You can't.
Correct. The context right before chapter 13 is talking about what the church is as one body. And then you have the chapter 13 showing you what that looks like lived out.
And you have to be careful because the world or sinfulness and the devil try to let us pull one verse out of the Bible.
Oh, sure, right.
Twist the wording around.
Yep. Yep. And then you also then have to, if you're going to talk about that chapter in an in-depth manner with someone, I would first start by figuring out what your definitions of love are. Because if you're not talking about the same, if you're not talking on the same plane as far as definition goes, then you're going to be talking beyond each other. And I guarantee you start a conversation with someone that's not a church-going individual and not someone that's in scripture, their understanding of love and the definition they're going to be using of love is going to be not anywhere near what our definition of love is. Good. Other thoughts or questions? That was a good question. I contemplated using more of a discussion in the sermon with that reading, but I would have gone over my time limit and I would have had people. So, but it's in there if you pay attention. There's a bit of it in there. So, all right, the sacrament of the altar. So this is page 6 of your handout. Page 6 of the handout. And again, folks in the chat, there it is. And you have it's the same one from last week, page 6. So we talked about baptism, and now we're moving into the sacrament of the altar. Remember, this is all being talked about under the context of comfort from the sacraments. We talked about vocation, we talked about our worship life, and now we're kind of narrowing in a little bit further and highlighting why and what God has given to us through the sacraments. So first and foremost with the sacrament of the altar is the key to understanding the sacrament of the altar. And the key to understanding the sacrament of the altar is Christ's words, for you. Now, I would put an asterisk there and say also it's about understanding the word is, right? We talked about that a little bit last week, is. And the is part is what makes it what it is. And then for you is the gospel part. So one way to think of it is for you, when you hear the words for you, given for you for the forgiveness of sins, that's the gospel. Okay, that's the gospel. The word is the presence of the embodiment of the gospel, the presence of Jesus, what makes it what it is, what makes it real. So the whole gospel is comprehended in this sacrament and is offered to us through the word, which promises that in and under the bread and the wine, we receive the body and blood that was sacrificed on the cross for our salvation. Pay attention to that. That's one of the major differences between us and another church body. We don't sacrifice every time you hear the words of institution. Okay, that's not a new sacrifice. Jesus died once and for all. What we are using is his words, his formula, so to say, that make it what it is in the moment. So you don't have the visual in your head that somehow in those words, Jesus is dying again. That's not what's happening. Those who realize the enormity of their sin, how many dangers abound, and how great Christ's gifts are that are given in the sacrament, will receive the Lord's Supper as often as possible. And then those listing there of the Augsburg Confession, the Formula of Concord, and the small called articles are all things you can look up and see the language in our confessions that talk about receiving the sacrament regularly. And by regularly, the confessions will go on to say every Lord's Day, whenever the people have gathered. Now, that being said, why is this truth, that of the need for the sacrament, a struggle for some? Why is the thought, or sometimes maybe even desire, for the sacrament regularly a struggle for some?
You mean they struggle with needing it?
Like, for instance, probably 6 months after I was here, I had a member come to me and say, it really seems like we're taking communion much more often. And I said, well, that's a good thing. And they said, I'm not so sure. Okay, so there's not an understanding of what?
This is sin.
Well, yeah, forgiveness of sin, because that's what you're receiving. And as Luther's commentary in Ephesians, the armor of God, he talks about if at any moment you can see the amount of arrows pointed at you, you would run to the sacrament every day. Okay, there's never a time that we're not under assault of the devil. Well, why do we struggle with that? What type of world do we live in? What does the world tell you? Yeah, the world is always, not sometimes, the world is always telling you a good person until you disagree with them. Right? But then you can go find people that will agree with you until you're a good person again. But yes, it's about doing your best. Think about that. How many times have you talked to someone who has recently had someone die, and one of the phrases you'll hear is, oh, they were such a good person. Right? And it's almost like, and usually when you start having that conversation, what's underlying that conversation is, I'm not quite sure of their faith, but I want to convince myself that they're a good person.
During the sermon today, I thought to myself how often I cheapen Jesus' death because he rose again. And what I mean by that is we know he rose, but yet do I really truly understand what Jesus actually went through?
Sure.
On the cross and before the cross and
Well, okay, that's a good point you make. So what Dean is saying is sometimes I feel like I cheapen God's grace because I'm going to the empty tomb. I'm recognizing that Jesus rose, but I'm forgetting all that he went through. Okay, this is what I would say, and a fellow theologian noted this too. This is one of the issues with the movie The Passion. Good movie. Okay, but unless you don't want the vivid imagery. Good movie, but where does it leave you? The Passion leaves you with all of the emotional damage of what he goes through. He doesn't take you to the resurrection. There's a quick glimpse of it, but he doesn't take you to the resurrection. In fact, the first time I saw it, I thought, okay, is they going to make another one where somehow we have a 2-hour movie of the resurrection? You know, because that was missing. But as a biblical, in the sense of what God's word delivers to us, it's just like what I teach with confirmation kids and our younger kids. This is one of the flaws of Sunday school up until about 20 years ago. Sunday school teaching would take you to Jesus dying for your sin, and that's where it would stop. But if you stop there, what do you have? You have a dead guy on the cross, right? You've got to go all the way. You've got to go to, that's why Holy Week is such a precious week for us, especially in light of starting it with Ash Wednesday, and then 6 weeks later coming to Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday, and the Vigil, because all of that is tied together very intricately and purposefully by the church fathers when they put the lectionary together and the way of worshiping together, because it delivers to us the very essence of who Jesus is and why he came to us and the love that he shows to us. So yes, it's important that, yes, we have the cross, right? We have the cross, but visually, what's most prominent? We have the risen Christ as well. You've heard me say this before. There's one more image I wish we had, and that is I wish somewhere we had the nativity, because then we would have the total, in a sense, imagery of Jesus. All right. So misunderstanding of what the sacrament is, getting back to that question, and this gets into those preconceptions as I was talking about in the sermon today. We have a preconceived idea of who I am and what my relationship is with Jesus and with God. And therefore, based on those preconceptions, I have an idea in my head as to how much I need communion. And as we'll get to a little bit later, that's one of two questions that should be asked when we start talking about communion and its frequency. But we'll get to that in a bit. But the other thing that I think that we struggle with is sin. And if I don't bring myself to partake of communion regularly, then I don't have to regularly deal with the sin issue, right? Because even though it doesn't matter which service you come here, what do we start with? Except for midweek services. We start with confession absolution. So you are going to deal with the sin issue unless you just go through the motions with that as well.
I was just going to say that if we're a Christian and we're going to we start with confession and absolution.
Right.
We should understand we need communion.
Right. And that going through the motions is what someone has shared before too. When we were going to every Sunday communion down at St. John's, I had an elder say, well, aren't we going to lose the specialness of it? It's not going to be special anymore. And I just frankly looked at the elder and I said, that's your problem. That's your heart. That's your mind. I mean, you could use that excuse with anything, right?
Church more than
Well, right. Well, think of it. I said, then don't kiss your wife more than once. You got married and you kissed your wife when you got married. You don't need it anymore, right? You can use that philosophy and go down the line of many things. Don't fall into that trap, because the reality is each and every time you break the threshold of this place, you do well to prepare your heart and to know what you're about to receive. Pay attention to what you're doing. Yes, it's very difficult. Trust me, I know, right? Children of parents with children, it's very difficult to pay attention sometimes when you've got 3 kids running 3 different directions and you're trying to speak the liturgy. But that's also the beauty of the liturgy, because in the midst of it, you can cry, Lord, have mercy on these children. And then continue on with the liturgy. And but there's even times I, as a pastor, can hit because of different things that are going on in my life. There's been Sundays where I come down, I say the invocation and we begin. And next thing I know, I'm saying the benediction. Autopilot kicked in and we went through service. And hopefully I didn't skip everything in between, which, going back on the recording, I realized I didn't. But that's just how we can get sometimes. The true body and blood. It's the true body and blood of our Lord Jesus in and under the bread and wine, which we Christians are commanded by Christ's word to eat and to drink. Some might get a little uncomfortable with that language when it comes to the sacrament, because we know that the sacrament is the embodiment of the gospel. And so we get a little nervous when we hear the word command, which is law, in with the gospel, but it's not. It's simply Jesus saying, this is for you, do it. What Christ's lips say and speak, so it is. He can never lie or deceive. So lips, lie, deceive are the 3 spaces there for, that's large catechism language. The sacrament of the altar is not for man to determine what it is and what benefit it gives. And this is where sometimes I think we get tripped up. Because especially when I start talking about how, someone might come to me and say, hey, Pastor, we're going on vacation. We're going to be visiting my uncle, and he's a Methodist, and I know they're going to be having communion. And I just wanted to let you know that I'm probably going to take communion with them. To which I say, I wouldn't do that. And here's why. And I'll explain. Well, the Methodist teaching of communion is that it's not the true presence. And you're not going to be receiving the sacrament. And in some ways, also what you're doing by coming forward with them is you're making a statement that you are in confession with that church body as you come forward and partake of the sacrament. To which typically almost every time I have this conversation, someone will say, well, I know what communion is and I know what my relationship with God is. Therefore, I should be able to take communion wherever I want. Okay, the sacrament of the altar is not for man to determine what it is and what benefit it gives. Jesus does that. And where does Jesus do that? In the words of institution. And so even a church body that gives you the words of institution, praise be to God, they're being biblical in that sense. But then if their theology says that it's not the true presence, then they're not truly understanding what the word of God is. So be careful if you ever find yourself slipping into that thought of, I know what my relationship with God is, therefore I can partake of communion where I want. Thoughts or questions about that? All right. The power of the sacrament depends not on your worthiness. Thanks be to God, right? No matter whether you are worthy or unworthy, you have here his body and blood by virtue of these words that are added to the bread and wine. For upon these words rest all our foundation, protection, and defense against all errors and deception that have ever come or may yet come. If you feel unworthy to partake of communion, you're in the right place. So long as you are repenting of your sin and acknowledging who you are. But if you feel unworthy, you're doing that. You're in the right place. This treasure is for you. Christ asks me to eat and to drink. To eat and to drink, so that this treasure may be my own and may benefit me as a sure pledge and token. In fact, it is the very same treasure that is appointed for me against my sin, death, and every disaster. So in essence, what that paragraph at the end of page 6 is giving you is the language of just how this is comfort for you. All right, then page 7. Therefore, the sacrament is given as a daily pasture and sustenance, that faith may refresh and strengthen itself so that it will not fall back in such a battle, but become even ever stronger and stronger. Daily, it says there, right? You can recall, just like what we talked about when we walked through the liturgy, the worship service, the divine service. The divine service is not just for Sunday. It is there to sustain you each and every day of your life. It must be a priority. Think of the many and various activities that you set as a priority throughout your days, and you will not be removed from them. I know all of us have priorities throughout our days that we set, and if that gets messed up, our day is a mess. But then the problem is think about how many of those things we set as a priority over and above nurturing our faith. And then we wonder why we respond the way we do in the face of trial or even joy. In the face of trial, we ask, why me? In the face of joy, we say, ooh, look at me. So the challenge we have is priorities, making it a priority. And one of the biggest, I would say the biggest idol of our time right now is busyness. And depending on where you're at within your family life and season of family, one of the largest of those is sports and activities. And we've let it be what it is. We don't blink an eye necessarily of knowing that, oh, okay, this is going to take me away from my ability to worship. So how can I do something different? Or if I have to be there, how can I worship in a different way?
Sometimes I forget what company we're in, we're partaking in the sacrament, the angels, archangels, and all that comes from heaven. I think sometimes I forget that
Sure,
too.
right? Yeah, I mean, we are completing the circle, so to say, of the table. As we come to the rail, on the other side of the rail is those who have gone before us and the company of heaven. That's the beauty we have of being the body of Christ. And so, I mean, I know it can get very much a tiresome conversation to hear pastors say, well, yep, sports, activities, this and this, but it's true. We set other priorities over and above taking care of our soul. Look at the next part. Psalm 23 assures us that we will walk through the valley. And that valley is life. Yea, though I walk through life, the valley of the shadow of death, with all its joys and struggles. Now, look at Psalm 23, specifically verse 4, which is this verse. Now, I want you to see the beauty that's in here and even into verse 5. And it's showing you what provides you comfort. So as you walk through this life, you will fear no evil, for you are with me. So that's that. Remember how I've talked before. When you're going through what you go through in life, you know what is to come. You do not fear the immediate because you know who has you and whose you are. And that's that end times view, always having a focus on heaven. I will fear no evil. Now look the beauty of this. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. What is that? What's the rod? The pointy end of the rod is the law, God's word. So if you look at a staff, right? I've got one hanging in my office. The bottom part, that's for the prodding along of the sheep when they needed the law. Get where you need to go. But then what's the staff part? The hook. That's the gospel. That's the grabbing of the sheep and pulling them out of danger, pulling them off of the cliff. That's the beautiful imagery that you have there. Even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And that's a challenge for us sometimes, because I know for a fact that when you're beat with the law, you don't find comfort in that in the moment. But boy, when you realize why that law was working on you, you do begin to see comfort in it. We talk as teachers quite a bit, and even parents will talk like this, in that kids want boundaries. Kids want rules. In fact, sometimes when they're acting out, it's either because those rules aren't clear and they're not quite sure what they're supposed to be doing, or they're testing and they want to see how far they can push it. But there is a deep down desire, because that's what God has given us, right? What has He written on our hearts? He's written the law on our hearts, the natural knowledge of good and not good, or right and wrong. So we seek that naturally. But the beauty you have here is the law and the gospel. Do you have something?
It's a little bit of a sidetrack, but it ties in Proverbs 3, we're studying Proverbs in our Wednesday night, now Tuesday night Bible study. And this verse jumped out at me when we were studying this a couple weeks ago, but everybody memorizes 5 and 6, right? Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding. Right. But right after that, it talks about, so be not wise, verse 7 says, be not wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. So it's still law. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. And it's talking about the law.
Right. Well, look at Psalm 1. Well, the Psalm 1, the Psalms begin with, I love the law. I meditate on God's law. Right? And that's that understanding. Now, some theologians will begin to bristle whenever they hear a pastor say God's law is good. I'm not saying that God's law gives you life. That's wrong. No, God, healing and refreshment, because God's law is his good and gracious will for you. And the reality is, when we act according to what he wants us to do, what goes well? Right. But the reality is we are sinful and unclean, and therefore we don't always do the law as we ought.
Don't have laws for certain things.
Right.
Like traffic control, for instance.
Right. Right. Just pull up a video of India and watch their traffic patterns. And how people aren't dying left and right, I don't know. But they have organized chaos, which laws there would help, maybe. But in a way, they've already made laws, because even though it's chaotic, they have figured out there's some sort of law working through that. But nonetheless, the law is not, we've been Waltherized. Walther was heavy on law and gospel, which is good. In fact, Luther and in our explanation, not Luther per se, but in our catechism, the explanation of the catechism, we even teach how the proper distinction of the God's word only comes through the right understanding of law and gospel. But whenever we talk about law, we tend to talk about it from the stance of salvation. And so, yes, from the standpoint of salvation, the law kills. That's what the law does. And the law always drives you back to the reality of who you are as a sinner. But then on the other side of the law is the gospel. And then within your salvation and within the gospel, we see that God's law is good for us. But nonetheless, what we're getting at here in Psalm 23, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And then go on to verse 5. And this is how. It's the sacraments. Look at it. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, and you anoint my head with oil. You have baptism and communion there. My cup overflows. Such a beautiful part of the hymn there, or the psalm there, that makes a great connection for us to comfort in the sacraments. Right. He will always be with us. This is like verse 6, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. How? God's continued care. And the result of his care is there through the means of grace. That's right. That's the language we use of it. The means, the way in which something is delivered, grace. His word and sacrament. Then there's the devil. For the devil is a furious enemy. When he sees that we oppose him and attack the old man, and that he cannot topple us over by force, he prowls and moves about on all sides. Why does he do that? What's he waiting for? Yeah, he's waiting for a weak spot. He's waiting for an opportunity to pounce. And what is the devil's greatest weapon? As the devil is prowling around you, waiting for you to be weak, what's his greatest weapon?
God's word itself.
Well, he can use God's word as a weapon, but that would almost be too evident.
Did God really say?
Did God really say? And that's an example of subtleties. His greatest weapon is subtleties. Subtleties, being subtle. So what I mean by that is think of how we have come to be accepting of various behaviors in our culture. It's because it's been a subtle change in language. Right? That's why when you hear me talk, and we were talking about love, for instance, I said we need to make sure we start with the right definition of love, because there are people that have subtly changed that definition on purpose. And then if we're not careful, this is how Satan will work. He'll allow those subtleties to enter into your conscience and begin to sear your conscience away from God's word, away from the truth. And that's where we're able to get what I talked about in the sermon today. That's where we get to our preconceived ideas. And we feel so passionately about those preconceived ideas because we feel like it's good and true. But that's what Satan does as he prowls around, just kind of see how he is just throwing little, did God really says at you? And then just tweaking things just a little bit. Because obviously, he doesn't want to make it so different that immediately you're going to recognize what it shouldn't be. Even though we are living in a time where the people that evil is not evil anymore is just out there and has no qualms about showing their true colors. Just be very careful. Be very careful at the subtle things. And it might sound like sometimes your pastor is, aren't we in the weeds, Pastor? Aren't we? We're just talking about semantics and definitions. Well, no, definitions are very important. And we need to make sure we're talking on the same, or at least you understand where I'm coming from first and foremost. Okay, because if not, then, and this could happen too, you might be reading an author and they're talking about something, but you have your idea in mind of what they're talking about. And at the end of the day, you finally realize you've been led astray because that's not what they were talking about.
I mean, you think about that in the Garden of Eden when the devil was tempting Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve were perfect. But yet the devil used that they could be like God.
Yeah.
That was the, I mean,
Yeah.
and they were perfect.
Correct. But they were also given, they are the ones who had complete free will. Because God did not desire anyone to be forced to love him. He wanted genuine love. I'm just going back real quick. I had someone ask about, explain the in the presence of my enemies bit. Well, if we think about it, our enemies are first and foremost ourselves, right? In the sense of our sinful condition. And so we must consider that as we are confessing our sin, there's an ongoing battle within us of the old Adam and the new Adam that doesn't want you to confess your sin, that has no desire for you to be right. But also, you know that there's always going to be people against you because Jesus promised that. People will hate you because of my name. And in the midst of that part of the valley of the shadow of death, life, you are being comforted. You are being comforted even when people around you do not like you and do not care for you. And then also you have to include in there the fact that Satan is prowling around. So in the midst of your enemy, big E enemy, God is providing for you. He tries every trick and does not stop until finally he wears us out so that we either renounce our faith or throw up our hands and put up our feet, becoming indifferent or impatient. I've seen so many people where this is the case that happens, and they walk away from the church. They want nothing to do with the church. And the unfortunate part is every trick includes their own idea of what the church should be and their own idea of what God's word should say. And then when it doesn't, and when the pastor doesn't say what they want them to say, or doesn't act like they want them to act, or the church doesn't appear the way they want the church to appear, they're not willing to come under the submission of truth. They want to listen to their own notion of what should be. Now, to this purpose, the comfort of the sacrament is given when the heart feels that the burden is becoming too heavy, so that it may gain here new power and refreshment. Okay, you don't face the devil alone. That's a comfort that we have. In fact, the devil has been defeated. And so it's kind of sad when we give him ground because he's already been defeated. But the reality is it's very difficult for us because he is very sneaky. Comfort from the treasure. The only way this treasure is passed along and made our very own is in the words given and shed for you. Again, going back to where we started. Our understanding of the sacrament centers around the words for you. Christ's body can never be an unfruitful, empty thing that does not or profits nothing. Yet no matter how great the treasure is in itself, it must be included in the word and administered to us. Although the work is done and the forgiveness of sin is secured by the cross, it cannot come to us in any other way than through the word. Here again, the sacrament is not what you think of it. It is what his word, God's word, Jesus' word said. It's what Jesus has made it to be. So credo connection, top of page 8, but now the entire gospel in the third article, I believe in the Holy Christian Church, the forgiveness of sin, and so on, are embodied by the word in this sacrament and presented to us. Now, by no means is this forced. So this is dovetailing on the conversation that Luther has extensively about it. But we don't force anyone to partake of the communion. By faith, we hunger for the sacrament. Again, if you're nurturing and nourishing your faith, if that is not a priority for you, you will likely find no hunger for the sacrament. Okay, and then Luther says about this to beware. First, pinch yourself to make sure you're alive. Look around to make sure you're in this world, and then be very aware that the devil's coming after you. Is what Luther warns. The hearing of the word creates a hunger within us that craves the embodiment of said word. So this is something that I've said numerous times. The more you hear the word, the more you will hunger for the word. They should not act from compulsion, being forced by others, but in obedience. But the words are added, as often as you drink it, there he compels no one, but leaves it to our free choice. I answer this, that is true, yet it is not written so that we should never do so. And then this next statement is important in that, yes, since he speaks the words, as often as you drink it, it is implied that we should do it often. This is added because he wants us to have the sacrament free. Okay, when a church and congregation does not serve communion often, the sacrament is not free. Because in order for it to be free, you need the opportunity to partake or not. Okay, and this is what I said earlier. It's really about two questions rather than one, because often this is wrapped up in the one question. The two questions are this: how often should a congregation serve communion? And the next question, how often does a person commune? Those are two different questions. Now, I know the answer that I would give to both of those and the reasonings I would based on Scripture. But we do have to recognize that there is room there for you to not partake. But for you to not partake should not be grounded in simply, oh, I had it 2 times already this month. Mixed into this is the idolatry of time, obviously. Why don't we want to see, some of us might even walk into church and we see that communion is set and we're like, oh man, I was hoping we'd get out of here earlier. But we're not. So that's the idolatry of time. Because we've been conditioned. Here's some more subtleties coming in, right? Over time, because we've allowed ourselves to be exposed to the way the media works in our culture, we are conditioned to only have short times of attention.
Disagree.
Well, that's something completely, but yes. And also an unfortunate thought that one can is just what I said before, is we feel like we can commune too much, and that's where we might come into the mindset of, like I said earlier, it's just not special anymore. To which I would say again, that's an attitude issue. That's a matter of exploring your heart. We go because we need to. We go because we are poor, miserable, sinful people. We go exactly because we are unworthy. And then jump to page 9. I just want to give you this last answer. You can read those other parts on your own. From where do we receive comfort? You will go to the source that satisfies the desire of your soul. As a child of God, someone who's focused on the world, obviously you're going to go to that desire that satisfies the desires of your flesh. But here we're talking about the desires of the soul. All right, any thoughts or questions as we close that out? Clarifications, anything of the sort? All right, seeing none, let's pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Have a great rest of the day.